If she suddenly stops calling or texting, don't panic because the silence isn't random. It's not a mystery and it's not confusion, it's information. And once you understand what that information really means, you'll never see communication the same way again. Silence is one of the most honest forms of communication because it reveals direction without emotion, excuses, or explanations. When someone wants to talk to you, they do. When someone is excited about you, they find time. When someone feels connected, they reach out naturally. No strategy, no overthinking, no waiting for the right moment. Interest expresses itself through action. But when the calls stop, when the texts disappear, when the energy fades, the mind tries to protect itself by creating stories. You tell yourself she's busy, she's stressed, she needs space, she's going through something. And sometimes those things are true, but what matters isn't the reason. What matters is the pattern. Consistent silence always reflects a shift in emotional priority. People make time for what matters to them, not what they say matters, what they show matters. Silence isn't rejection in words, but it is rejection in behavior. It's the absence of emotional investment. It's the signal that your presence in her life is no longer a priority. And that truth hurts more than any argument or goodbye because there's nothing to respond to, nothing to fix, nothing to negotiate, just distance. And distance reveals where you stand. When communication was strong, you felt included in her world. You knew what she was doing, how she was feeling, what she was thinking. There was flow, there was exchange. But now you're on the outside, you're guessing, you're waiting, you're hoping, you're checking your phone more than you should. And that's the moment the power dynamic shifts because the person who waits is the person who cares more. Silence puts you in a reactive position. You start analyzing timing. You wonder if you should text first. You replay your last conversation. You question whether you said something wrong. You slowly move from confidence into uncertainty, not because of something she said, but because of what she didn't say. And that's the trap. Silence creates emotional noise in your head, but the truth is simple. If someone wants to talk to you, they will. If someone misses you, you'll know. If someone values you, you won't feel confused about where you stand. Clarity doesn't come from more messages. Clarity comes from noticing who chooses to show up. Silence is not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's a choice, conscious or unconscious, to invest energy elsewhere. And once you see it that way, you stop taking it personally. You stop chasing explanations. You stop trying to decode behavior because there's nothing to decode. Silence already said everything. One of the biggest illusions people fall into is believing that attraction needs to be maintained through reminders, that if you don't text first, call first, or keep the conversation alive, the connection will fade. But real attraction doesn't work like that. It doesn't need constant effort to survive. It doesn't need chasing, convincing, or emotional maintenance. Attraction expresses itself naturally. When someone is genuinely interested in you, you don't have to wonder where you stand. You don't have to calculate timing. You don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing. There's an ease to the interaction, a flow, a sense that both people want to be there. Communication happens because it feels good, not because it feels necessary. But when attraction starts fading, effort increases on one side and disappears on the other. You become the one initiating, the one checking in, the one carrying the emotional momentum, and slowly, without realizing it, you step into the role of keeping the connection alive by yourself. That's not attraction anymore, that's attachment. True interest creates movement toward you, not away from you. It creates curiosity, not silence. It creates presence, not distance. When someone feels drawn to you, they don't need to be reminded you exist. You live in their awareness naturally. They think of you during their day. They want to share things with you. They reach out without being prompted. And this is where most people get stuck. They confuse effort with value. They believe that if they just try harder, care more, show more interest, communicate more, the attraction will return. But attraction doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to emotional space. The more you chase, the more you signal need. The more you signal need, the less attractive you become. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because desire only grows when it's free, not when it's managed. When someone stops reaching out, the natural reaction is to fill the silence, to send another message, to check if everything is okay, to reopen the door. But what you're really doing is preventing the truth from revealing itself. You're not allowing her to show you how she actually feels. You're controlling the interaction to avoid discomfort. And that keeps you in illusion because real attraction doesn't need you to prove yourself. It doesn't need consistency from only one side. It doesn't need you to hold the connection together with effort and anxiety. It feels light, it feels mutual, it feels easy. And if it suddenly doesn't feel that way anymore, that's not something you fix by talking more. That's something you understand by stepping back, by allowing space, by letting the dynamic unfold without interference. Silence, in this case, isn't something to fight, it's something to observe. Because if she truly wants you in her life, distance won't erase that. But if she doesn't, no amount of reminders will create it. And that's the moment you stop trying to maintain attraction and start respecting yourself enough to only invest where it's already real. There's a quiet truth most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. The one who is thinking more is usually the one who is emotionally ahead. You're replaying moments, reading between lines, checking your phone, wondering what she's doing, and imagining what could happen next. Meanwhile, she's just living her day, not analyzing, not waiting, not stuck in the same mental loop. And that difference creates the emotional imbalance. You feel connected because your mind is constantly focused on her. But focus doesn't equal connection. It just means your emotional energy is invested. And when that energy isn't being mirrored, it turns into longing instead of bonding. This is how attachment forms, not through shared moments, but through internal narratives. You start building a relationship inside your head that's stronger than the one happening in real life. You imagine conversations, you predict her reactions, you create emotional meaning from small interactions, and slowly the version of her in your mind becomes more real than the person she actually is in the present. That's why silence feels so powerful. Not because she did something dramatic, but because your mind has no feedback anymore. There's no new information, so it fills the gap with imagination,
Yeah.
doubt, regret. And the more space there is, the more your thoughts expand, occupy it. But here's the key realization: if someone is truly emotionally engaged with you, they don't leave you alone with your thoughts. They create shared reality, they participate, they respond, they make their presence felt. When you're the only one thinking, the connection becomes one sided. And one sided connections always hurt more because you're experiencing the emotional weight of two people by yourself. You're carrying the meaning, the memory, the potential, the attachment, while she's just carrying her life forward. And that gap between emotional investment is what creates anxiety, overthinking, and the feeling of being stuck. It's not that you miss her, you miss being emotionally matched, you miss being met at the same level of care, attention, and presence. You miss feeling chosen, included, and wanted. And when that disappears, your mind keeps trying to recreate it because it hasn't accepted that the dynamic has changed. So you keep thinking, not because you're weak, but because you're still emotionally open, still available, still attached to a version of the connection that no longer exists. But awareness changes everything. The moment you realize that you're the one doing most of the emotional work, something shifts. You stop romanticizing the silence. You stop seeing distance as mystery. You stop assuming depth where there is actually disengagement. You start seeing reality clearly, and clarity is painful at first, but it's also liberating because it gives you back control over where your energy goes and reminds you that connection should feel shared, not imagined, balanced, not one sided, alive, not mental. The real healing begins when you stop investing emotionally in someone who is no longer investing in you. And that's when your thoughts slowly return to where they belong, back to yourself. There's a point in every fading connection where the silence starts to feel different. It's no longer just about her being busy or distracted. It feels deeper than that. It feels like she's not worried about losing you anymore. And that realization can be more painful than rejection itself. Because when someone truly values you, they feel the risk of absence. They care about how distance might affect the bond. They don't want to create uncertainty. They don't want to leave you guessing. They make small efforts to maintain emotional closeness even during busy or stressful times. But when the communication stops and stays stopped, it means something has shifted internally. She no longer feels urgency, no longer feels the need to reassure, no longer feels the emotional consequence of silence. In other words, she feels safe losing you. And that safety doesn't come from confidence, it comes from emotional detachment. She feels that your presence in her life is optional, not essential, that you'll still be there, that the connection will remain available even if she withdraws. There's no perceived cost to distance anymore, and that's the dangerous part because when someone knows they can leave without losing you, they unconsciously stop respecting the emotional bond, not intentionally, not cruelly, just naturally. Human psychology responds to perceived value through scarcity and investment. When something feels guaranteed, effort fades. This is why chasing never works. The more you try to reconnect, the more you reinforce the idea that she doesn't have to try. You show her that the connection exists regardless of her behavior, that you'll fill the gaps, that you'll wait, that you'll adjust. And while that feels loving, it actually removes all emotional tension from the dynamic. She doesn't feel the risk of losing you because you've removed the risk. So silence becomes comfortable for her. Not because she doesn't care at all, but because she doesn't feel the emotional weight of distance the way you do. You feel the absence, she feels the freedom. And this is where self respect becomes critical. Not in an angry way, not in a dramatic way, but in a grounded, honest way. You have to recognize when your presence is being taken for granted, when your emotional availability has become expected instead of appreciated. because real connection only survives when both people feel the potential loss, when both people sense that the bond matters, when both people invest. The moment only one person is holding the emotional rope, the connection stops being mutual and starts being conditional. And that's the moment you stop trying to hold on tighter and start realizing that anyone who feels safe losing you was never afraid of losing you in the first place. There's a subtle but powerful dynamic that happens when you're always available emotionally, even when the other person isn't. You reply quickly, you show interest, you check in, you stay open, understanding, patient. And on the surface, that looks like maturity, kindness, emotional intelligence. But underneath it, something else is forming. You're offering emotional access without emotional investment in return. You're giving someone full entry into your thoughts, your feelings, your attention, while they're giving you partial presence, delayed responses, and uncertain energy. And over time, that creates a quiet imbalance where you become emotionally accessible, but not emotionally valued, because access without effort removes urgency. She knows she can reach you anytime. She knows you'll respond. She knows you're emotionally there, but she doesn't have to show up the same way to keep that access. There's no requirement to match your level of presence, no expectation of consistency, no emotional standard. So the connection shifts from mutual to one sided. And this is where many people lose themselves without realizing it. You start adjusting your behavior to maintain proximity. You lower expectations. You accept less communication. You normalize distance. You tell yourself you're being flexible when really you're compromising your emotional needs, not because you don't deserve more, but because you're afraid of losing what little connection remains. So you keep the door open. You stay available. You wait. You respond. You invest. And the more you do, the more the dynamic solidifies. You become the emotional provider, and she becomes the emotional observer. She receives your presence without having to earn it. And when that happens, your value shifts in her perception, not because you became less attractive, but because you became less scarce, less challenging, less emotionally impactful. Your presence stopped feeling like something that could be lost. It started feeling guaranteed. And nothing that feels guaranteed creates emotional pull. This is why boundaries are so important in emotional connection. Not walls, not coldness, but self respect. The ability to say, if you're not meeting me at the same level, I'm not going to keep giving more, because real intimacy is built on mutual investment. It's built when both people choose to show up, when both people feel the effort, when both people feel the risk of losing the connection. But when only one person is emotionally open, the connection becomes unbalanced. It turns into emotional labor instead of emotional exchange. And that's exhausting, not physically. Emotionally, you start feeling drained without knowing why. You feel anxious. You feel uncertain. You feel like you're always the one carrying the emotional momentum, and deep down you know something is wrong, not with her but with the dynamic, because connection should feel nourishing, not depleting. It should feel shared, not managed. It should feel chosen, not tolerated. And the moment you stop giving emotional access to someone who isn't emotionally investing, you stop being available and you start being valued. At some point, the silence stops feeling personal and starts feeling purposeful, not because she planned to teach you a lesson, but because her absence forces you to finally look inward instead of outward. You're no longer focused on decoding her behavior, her timing, her intentions. You start noticing your own patterns, your own reactions, your own emotional habits, and that's where the real shift happens. Her lack of communication becomes a mirror. It shows you how much of your emotional energy was living outside of you, how much of your peace depended on someone else's attention, how often you were waiting instead of choosing, reacting instead of creating. And that awareness is uncomfortable, but it's powerful. Because now the question isn't, why isn't she texting me? The question becomes, why am I giving so much importance to someone who isn't choosing me? That question changes everything. You start redefining your boundaries, not by demanding more from her, but by expecting more from yourself. You stop checking your phone. You stop refreshing conversations. You stop measuring your worth through response time. You stop putting your emotional state in someone else's hands. You begin choosing yourself in small ways. You redirect your focus into your goals, your body, your work, your friendships, your growth, not as a distraction, but as a recentering. And slowly something shifts inside. You feel lighter, not because she came back, but because you came back to yourself. This is the moment where silence transforms from rejection into redirection, from loss into alignment, from emotional dependency into emotional independence. You realize that you were never powerless. You just forgot where your power lived. It was never in her responses, it was always in your choices. And once you reclaim that, the dynamic changes permanently. Whether she returns or not becomes irrelevant, because you're no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing your time, your energy, your standards, your future. And the strongest position you can ever be in isn't being wanted, it's being whole without needing to be.